Welcome to the town hall on the HCBS rule. And I know you are thinking, what is this HCBS thing? We're going to be telling you, so don't you worry about it. My name is Judy Mark. I am the president of Disability Voices United. And we are an organization, a statewide advocacy organization led by and for people with disabilities and their family members. And I also am the parent of a 26-year-old son who is served by a regional center. We are going to get started, but before we do that, I want to encourage everyone to select a language. Those of you who are Spanish and Korean speakers already know the deal, but you English speakers need to select a language too by going down to the globe on the bottom that says interpretations, and then selecting the English language. For those of you who want Spanish, select Spanish. Those of you who want Korean, please select that. We are also asking for folks, we will allow you to have questions during this event, but these questions are going to be at the very end after the presentation, because we will probably answer your question at some point. You will be able to ask questions using either the chat, or you could choose, you could raise your hand by clicking down on reactions, choosing raise hand like I just did, and we will call on you. And you can ask your question in either Spanish, English, or Korean, okay? All right, well, let us get started. Welcome, everybody. This has been a long 9 years since we first heard about these rules coming down from the federal government. And what a great group of folks that we have been able to put here with all of you to watch. So this is our little slideshow, and hold on, it's not going. Go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, so these are the organizations that are co-sponsoring this wonderful event, including the California Community Living Network, my organization, Disability Voices United, PRAGNYA, Autism Society Los Angeles, Disability Rights California, Integrated Community Collaborative, Strategies to Empower People, ARCA, or the Association of Regional Center Agencies, PathPoint, Creative Steps, and the Korean SDP Network. So we thank all of our co-sponsors for getting the word out about this important event. So as we always do at DVU, we start with the people who are most impacted and really giving you information about why we're even here. So I'm going to first call on Molly Kennedy. Molly, go ahead and start.
Hello, everyone. Why is this new rule happening? So this new rule is for people with disability who have fought for years and years to get more inclusiveness in their life, to be more in the community, to have more choices. It's about our right to be active members of our community, our right to be included, have choices, get jobs, have friends, and live a better life. It is our right to have a person-centered plan, process, and to have services meet the goals that we want to achieve. It is our right to have people without disabilities, that we can all live a life without disabilities, the same with disability, the right to choice, the right to dignity, the right to have a life that we want, not told that we have to live. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Jin, why don't you go next?
Why is this new rule important? I have a simple answer. We are no longer being tucked away in the corner where others can't see us, like a messy classroom with first graders for the teacher to clean up after students go home. Most people with IDD have experienced this more than once in their lives, as if we were lampshades that needed occasional dusting and never felt fully included in anything. There are 6 points that I want to address. Person-centered planning. The way that IPPS are being done now is all about our deficits, the things we can't do. And in many cases, the person who is supposed to be at the center isn't even in the room. In fact, the person is supposed to be directing the planning process to the best of their ability. The HCBS rule makes person-centered planning the core of everything. The planning is supposed to occur at a place and time that works for the person. That means if a Sunday morning at Denny's is best for the person, the IPP needs to take place there. Also, the person can invite anyone they want to their IPP. You can invite friends, neighbors, and cousins to help you think about your future and the services that can help you achieve that future. Inclusion. Most of us felt really isolated just a few years ago when the pandemic started, and some of us still do. Imagine being confined to one perimeter like a park, where you walk with the same group of people every day. Or working at a workshop and putting nuts and bolts in bags. This is not community integration and employment. There is nothing satisfying with this setting at all. The HCBS rules state that in order to have true community integration, the person must have a choice in activities in the community that include meaningful interaction with individuals not receiving regional center services. Let's say I like to go work out. Instead of working out at a day program and being isolated in their center, I can go to one of those $10 a month gyms and be surrounded by other members of the gym and work out there. The same goes for employment. I should get support in finding meaningful employment at a competitive wage. And if that job doesn't work for you, you should have the right to customized employment. Choice. Choice is everything. For example, maybe you live in a group home and you share the house with other residents. We can choose who we want our roommates to be. Instead of having arguments every night about what to watch, you and your roommate will have similar interests and agree on a show. But there's a lot more to choice than just a roommate. The HCBS rule allows us to decorate our rooms however we want, eat when we want, and eat what we want. It's kind of ridiculous to think that the federal government has to force us to do this. It's something we should have been doing all along. Choice also means we have a choice of service providers and settings in the community. We can also choose who supports us each day. We can choose someone we trust. Dignity. We often get confused between having dignity versus having autonomy. They have two different meanings. Dignity refers to an individual maintaining self-respect and being valued by others. Autonomy refers to individual control of decision-making and other activities. In my viewpoint, you can't have one without the other. The problem is, most people with disabilities have had neither. Freedom from coercion and restraint. No one should be restrained. It is just dangerous, and there are always alternatives. Restraint is where life-threatening accidents can happen. There are many deaths that have been reported in the IDD community, some of which are caused by restraints gone bad. There is one incident that I always remember. A staff member had physically restrained an individual due to a behavior issue and ended up killing the person. Privacy. Everyone wants privacy. Having a lock in a bathroom is very common. How many of us go use the restroom and immediately lock the door behind us without giving any thought to it? It's not a big deal. This is also for their safety because there are many assaults that go unreported every year within the disabled community. This is my final thought that I would like to leave with you tonight. A few nights ago, while I was getting ready to take a shower in my own bathroom, a staff member, whom I chose and respect, was getting the water ready. I always put my foot out, making sure that the water temperature is good. I started thinking about tonight's town hall. If my team didn't let me plan, if they didn't respect me, they would not give me the freedom to choose what I want to do. They would shower me in whatever temperature they preferred and not let me feel the water. The water temperature should be to my preference, like everything else. That is basic free choice. That is dignity and freedom. It's the same rights that able-bodied people have when setting the temperature of their shower. But that choice is a small one. We want to make the big choices too. Thank you.
Thank you. That was amazing, Tim and Molly. Setting us off for why we're here, why this rule is so important, and why it is a civil rights advancement for people with disabilities. Okay, we're going to go now to Disability Rights California to explain a little bit more in depth about why this is a civil rights issue.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Tim and Molly. Hi, everyone. My name is Will Liner. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights California. I'm also the brother of someone who receives regional center services, and I'm grateful to be here with all of you today to talk about the HCBS settings rule. The first point I want to make is that HCBS rights, they're civil rights, and the intent from the federal government is that these rules work together with other civil rights laws. Civil rights laws like the Americans with Disabilities Act, which says that states can't just isolate people with disabilities and lock them away. And a Supreme Court case called Olmstead, which says that pitting people with disabilities in institutions for no good reason, and I never think there's a good reason, it's discrimination. In other words, HCBS funding, it's about community, not institutions. And these rules are necessary because so much funding was going to settings that called themselves community-based, but felt to people like they were living in an institution where people had no choices about how to spend their day, no access to their communities, and spent all day with staff instead of other people out in the world. And the thing that makes these rules so important is that they're based on the experience of people, not providers. They ask things like, are people who receive HCBS services living the life they want? Do they have opportunities to work? Are they part of their community? All the things we think of as civil rights. Next slide. So Tim talked earlier about what the rules require: inclusion, choice, dignity, freedom, privacy, and person-centeredness. So let's quickly talk about in what settings these rules apply. Well, they apply to all community-based settings and supports that are funded with HCBS dollars. And that's the vast majority of settings in our system. This could mean residential settings like the services people receive in their own homes or group homes in the community. They also apply to non-residential settings like day programs, work activity programs, or employment programs, and all of the services that people receive in these settings. So the takeaway is that the impact really big in our system, and we hope that the HCBS settings rules have a big impact because they apply to many, many, many supports and many settings in our system. Next slide, please. Thank you. There are also additional rules for homes that are owned or operated by providers. I'm talking about group homes. I'm talking about community care facilities. I'm not talking about people who live on their own or with their families. So I'm talking about provider-controlled group homes. And this is because providers have a lot of control and power over people's lives. And there are some providers that may do things because it's easier for them, even if it means people lose their rights. So I'm talking about things like house rules that prevent people from having visitors when they want, or putting locks on cabinet doors so people can't eat what they want, or not letting people come and go when they want, all the types of things that Tim was talking about earlier. In the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of those additional rules. So these additional rules say that people that live in provider-owned and controlled settings, they have a right to lock their door. They have a right to decorate their rooms how they want, have visitors when they want. They have the right to access food when they want, even junk food, and have control over their schedules and activities. And I'm with Tim, why we need a rule like this to say these things? I wish we didn't, but we have one now, and I'm glad we do. Now, there are some exceptions that let providers restrict these rights based on what the rules call or a specific documentation of a health and safety risk. But these restrictions, they should be temporary. They shouldn't be used that often. So I think about things like an alarm on a door that prevents it from opening for 10 seconds to make sure there is staff available to support a person if they want to leave. Another example that's often used in our system is if a person's disability causes them to not be able to control their appetite and access to food can become deadly, well, then some restrictions might be allowed. But as we move forward at the HCBS rule, all these restrictions, they become exceptions. They are time limited. They're the exception, not the rule. The rule is people have rights to all of these things that I talked about on this slide. And then next slide, please. So the rules also provide additional protections from eviction or when a provider wants to kick someone out of their home. So now with these new rules, people will have the same protections under landlord-tenant laws as everyone else who rents a home. And I'll admit, I'm not a housing attorney, but I know that California generally has pretty good protections for people who rent their homes. So this means people can't be kicked out for no reason. And there needs to be a meaningful process to fight a decision that a provider might make to kick someone out. Then for the next slide, my colleague Sabrina is going to talk about some really important timelines that are associated with this settings rule.
Thanks, Will. Hi, y'all. My name is Sabrina Epstein. I use she, her pronouns. I work with Will at Disability Rights California, and I also am a disabled person. As far as when is this happening, this is a kind of confusing question because like Judy said at the start of this webinar, this rule has been in implementation for a very long time. And parts of the rule, like the person-centered planning parts that Tim talked about, already went into effect back in 2014. But now many parts of the rule go into effect on March 17th of this year, so next week, including the things that Will was talking about provider-controlled settings. But there is one caveat here, which is that California asks for more time on a few parts of the rule that will not go into full implementation next week. And this is specifically because of the pandemic, and those things do have a deadline as well. Those things are access to the broader community, opportunities for employment, option for a private unit or choice of roommate, and choice of a non-disability specific setting. And we think those are pretty big parts of the rule. So we want to make sure those do end up eventually getting implemented. but most of the other parts have either already gone into effect or are going to go into effect March 17th, next week.
Can I just ask whoever comes on to our meetings and writes all over our slides to just not do that? That's just like a little small thing that I really appreciate. What I'm going to have to do now is stop sharing so you don't see that blue line, and then I'll start sharing. This has happened before. It's really annoying. Okay, it's gone now once I stop sharing. It's kind of like an eraser. Thank you, Sabrina. Appreciate that. 9 long years. We have a set of service providers who are equally enthusiastic about this, this new rule, this civil rights progress. I'm not sure which of you I'm handing this over. Am I handing this over to Mark first, or who am I handing this over to?
Mark first.
Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mark Melanson, CEO of the California Community Living Network. This panel was asked to discuss how service providers are reacting and changing. As you can see by this first slide, it's a bit of a mixed reaction. Vendors or service providers and the different services that are being provided all feel a little differently about the changes. There are many vendors in the traditional system who work very hard every day to ensure that the services their agencies provide to people are first and foremost person-centered and encourage independence in leading self-directed lives with informed choice, control, dignity, respect, and that by the nature of the service facilitates full community inclusion and integration. These providers are pleased that they're already there. They don't need to make any changes. They are mentors and role models in the provider community in the traditional system. There are other providers who are really hard to reach. These are very small agencies. They're not very connected. And these tiny agencies don't really keep up with the new changes that are happening, changes that will impact the way that they provide services. So they don't know too much about it, and they may not be ready. And lastly, some providers don't like the changes at all and don't really want to change. See that photo below? They have their heads in the sand, hoping the changes won't really happen. Next slide, please.
I love that photo.
I thought you would, Judy. Compliance shouldn't be a bad word. Many of the folks that you'll hear from today have all been working hard to spread the word about these changes. And I believe that we all need to talk about these changes a little differently. When we hear words like compliance and non-compliance and rules and controlled and owned, they all kind of sound like bad things. Now, if we talk about it differently, being active members of our communities, included, independent, person-centered, choice, friends, live, work, play, these all sound like really great things to me. We should talk about these changes for what they really are, really and truly are, values. Very positive things happening for people and new and exciting opportunities for how people may use and receive services. Next slide, please. Since 2016, the California legislature has provided funding to the Department of Developmental Services to support vendors or service providers to make the changes that they may need to make, $15 million each year since 2016. Here are some examples of the innovative concepts that providers have been funded to do. Lots of person-centered training and planning, increasing college and jobs, more technology, educating clients and families on Social Security, smaller vehicles and wheelchair accessible vans, hiring more staff to reduce program ratios, changing service delivery models or developing new service delivery models, micro enterprise development, business ownership, and local business engagement, super creative when it comes to employment. Next slide, and I may have gone into the next slide. So next slide, please.
Oh.
Thank you, Judy. I went through all those really quickly and
perfect.
should have paused in the middle of my list and said next slide. Now I'll turn it over to some providers so that you can hear from them about what they're doing at their agencies. Let's go in this order. Lisa from Creative Steps, Jackie from Strategies to Empower People, and Harry from PathPoint. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, everybody. I'm happy to be here. Creative Steps, we have been a community integration program since we started in 2013. And we were founded on the belief that everybody has the right to be out in the community. It doesn't matter what the challenges are. And there are some challenges in getting people out into the community. One of those challenges, of course, have been, staffing, making sure that everybody has the support person that they work best with, having that choice, being able to be in the community, doing the things that they want to do. And we just keep trying to overcome all of the barriers. One of the things that we have been able to take advantage of, and we're very happy about that, is the HCBS compliance funding. We were able to get funding to do person-centered training for all of our staff, person-centered planning for all of the people that we support. And that was great because it takes money to actually be able to hire people who can help us do those trainings, and time and the ability to train all of our staff. So the grant that we received, the funding, was really instrumental in letting us go through the person-centered planning facilitator training and to really take the time to train all of our staff in person-centered thinking and strategies. The most recent grant that we got was to help us develop even further our employment program. We've always, as part of our program, helped the individuals that we support get either paid internships or just competitive integrative jobs in the community. That's always been a big focus, but that also takes time and planning and somebody who knows how to create those jobs, going through the certifications and the workshops, so that we are making sure that we are doing our employment planning to the best possible ability that we can. So we have really been able to increase and strengthen our program by applying for and getting those grants and helping to further our philosophy, further our programming in the best interests of the people that we're supporting, to try to create as many opportunities as we possibly can and give everybody the choice to live the type of lives that they want to live.
Thank
And
you, Lisa.
Jackie?
Hello. I was listening to you talk and I was thinking about how I started in this field. And so in 1988, this kind of tells you the story of what a person with a developmental disability, how they led me to where I was in 1992 to be HCBS compliant when I didn't even understand really clearly what that really meant, because it was 1992 and I just said, I'm old. I was working in an ICF DDH, a young lady named Tina. She was deaf with a developmental disability. She had been in 26 foster homes, Napa State Hospital, in and out of the system. She came into these very high ICF DDHs, were the highest level intermediate care facility, developmentally disabled, habilitative. You can see I have PTSD over trying to say all that. Tina was there. Licensing came through and said to us, Tina was too high functioning, because that was a great word that they like to use. So she was too high functioning and she could not be in the group home. She needed to move. Tina was deaf. The group homes were full of fluent signers. I looked all around the community to try to find an independent living program that had signers. There were none. And the state said she had to be out within 6 months, regardless. There was no services for her. She'd been in and out of the system. She'd been at Napa State Hospital. She was finally stable. So me and a group of people said, you know what, we're not going to have Tina get lost in the system again. So Tina ended up moving in with me while I waited for the state very slowly to give me a program design. And I chose to do independent living services. Here's the nuanced difference for me. In the ICF DDH, everything was controlled. It was called active treatment. If you've ever worked in the system, it was about blocks of time. You have to have someone doing something at all times. They couldn't just sit and watch a movie. Tina moves out into her own apartment. she starts to really excel. 1992, we get a program design. And the crazy thing that happened is her friends in the group home went, wait a minute here. There's her living in her own apartment, making her own choices, eating whenever she wants. And soon we started to see everybody that was living in that group home that Tina lived in said, I want independent living too. I want independent living too. And they all moved out. So you really start to see when a person notices their peer saying, you have choice and control. You get to eat what you want. You get to have a job. You get to have a home that you decorate. All those things that Will went over that someone should have in their group home. Tina's like, look, my house is decorated. She loved Peter Pan. So it was all over the place, but it was her home, her way. And so that's kind of how STEP started in 1992. We started to do supported living. And I think I was listening to some of the grants that you had. I've never done an HCBS grant. I probably should have thought of it. I've never had one. But if the 5 principles of supported living are always the driver, because supported living has always been HCBS compliant. Independent living has always been compliant. Before I even knew that was a phrase, that's who we were. The 5 principles of supported living are a home of one's own. The regulations say back in, I think it was brilliant, back in 1993, that a person had to be on the lease. The provider was not allowed to be on the lease. Control, right? That's a home of one's own. And I think when you look about as we move the system forward, can we have individuals living in their own homes, having that control? The other one is choice and self-direction. That was, we as providers were responsible and continue to be responsible to make sure a person is making the choices and self-directing their own life. Relationships, community membership, and flexible and tailored services and supports. So whenever I think about the word HCBS compliance and what we should do, I go back to those 5 principles as a provider to say, my responsibility always has been since 1992 to say, can I make sure that my agency is driven by Tina, her peers, and everyone else? So it started with one person telling me, hey, I don't want to go back and get lost in the system, to today where we serve lots of individuals that are deaf with developmental disabilities, plus other individuals that are really controlling their life. So I'm hoping that as providers see what a person with a developmental disability can achieve, and just the amount of self-esteem comes with having your own place. I hope providers continue to move forward and see this is a good thing. I love, Marcus told me about the head in the sand more than once, or the other one is he also says, can we stop being Jurassic Park? So he likes to use the dinosaur well, and I'm hoping that we all move forward into a new day in California and really embrace this rule and this change, and that we all become these values-based agencies that are very community-based. So thank you.
Thanks,
Jackie.
Jackie. Go ahead, Harry.
Boy, it's hard to follow Jackie. That was a great story, and really appreciate that. I'm the CEO of PathPoint, and I was the father of a child with a serious mental health disability. And I really appreciate Judy having us here and being part of this. I would say that the HCBS settings rule has made our agency a much better agency. We have lots of day services. We also had for quite a while people working on sub-minimum wage in the community in groups, not in a workshop, but still at 14C. And so as part of what we've done is we ended our all sub-minimum wage employment, have no one working under less than minimum wage. We trained with HCBS funds, got training to have staff become person-centered facilitators, so they could work with individuals who were previously working sub-minimum wage to develop a person-centered plan for what they want for employment going forward. So people are choosing their pathway through a person-centered process. We also early on got funding to do person-centered training for all of our staff, and then got money to train 3 staff members to become certified person-centered trainers, so they can continue to train and they continue to train all of our folks. And the other thing that we used funding for was to really bolster our technology program around assistive tech. We put a guide together that's free on our website for anybody who can benefit from it, but helping ensure that everybody can communicate what they want, what their desires are. And I think what, to me, HCBS is around is changing the orientation of this system to be not around what a provider like me wants, not about what DDS or regional center or the state wants, but to have it based on what each person wants and what they want their life to be. And I don't think we're there yet as a system, but I do think that the settings rule is a good step and that we need to keep at it. And I think Will did a nice job of talking through all the compliance stuff, and there's the compliance piece, but there's also sort of the mission of and the vision and the values of what this is about. And I think all of us as providers need to not think of it as just complying with the rule, but embodying the values and the purpose of that rule. And I know we still have a long ways to go. I'm not suggesting that my organization or any of us is there. Maybe Jackie's there, but we're working on it, and it's a continual process, and we will keep working on it. And thank you all for hosting this and promoting it and pushing it. It's making us all better, and it's making the system have better outcomes for individuals, which is the most important thing.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Jackie, Lisa, Mark. That was outstanding. So now we're going to go to the regional centers. The regional centers are responsible for a whole lot of this rule. And I'm going to now introduce Amy Westling from the Association of Regional Center Agencies. Go ahead, Amy. Is Amy there? She is there, and she's a co-host. Uh-oh.
There we go.
Yay. Okay.
All right. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here and talk a little bit about how the regional centers really have been working with not only their provider communities, but also their staff, as well as the individuals and families they support. So I'm going to provide a statewide perspective of some of the work the regional centers have been doing. And then I'm going to turn it over to someone to give a more local perspective as well. So as Judy said, the regional centers are a big part of how the word about HCBS has been spread and is being spread. And I want to take a step back, and I think other presenters have said as well, that HCBS, we need to think of it as not just a rule, but it's a way of thinking. And really foundational to the different components of HCBS, one being person-centered planning and the other being what we think of as the final rule, which, as others have said, goes into effect officially next week. The fundamental ways that we think about people and how they interact in the world really are informed by, both of those things are informed by the same principles. And that's first and foremost that people are experts about their own lives. People with disabilities historically have had lots of professionals tell them what is important for them. And what's important for people is still important because those are things about health and safety, but this puts much more of an emphasis on what's important to people and their expectations and their experiences in the community. And equally important is the recognition that everyone has the right to be part of the community, and the community is richer because of it. Over time, our thoughts about how people with disabilities can and should interact with the community, and I think Jackie raised this point, have really changed. Once upon a time, we were surprised and it was considered amazing that people with disabilities could and should live outside of institutional settings. And then we began to think more about, well, the places they live should be, as the federal government called it, home-like. So we should not just put people in a place, but they should begin to identify that as their home. And now we've gotten to the point where we say people that we support and that are supported by other similar systems should and could be part of the community, and the community should be part of them. So next slide, please.
There we go.
Okay, so regional centers have partnered with service providers to do a lot of this work, because a lot of the work that has to be done is about how services are delivered to people. So as others have spoken about, there have been the HCBS grants to help service providers make changes. And we as a system have been working with service providers to help them walk through what these changes might look like. And particularly as we're looking to develop new programs over the last 9 years, it's been really a focus on these programs, and the services being provided are meant to help people be part of the community. So a great example is the social recreation services. When they were suspended in 2008 or 2009, a long time ago, they had been programs where people with disabilities all got together with other people with disabilities. And when the restoration of those services happened, we said, okay, we're not going to restore it, we're going to redefine it. And we're going to redefine it as something that meant that you as a service provider would be supporting people to access their community and access everyone else in their community as well. We understand that compliance is part of this, that there has to be paperwork to say, yes, there is compliance because the federal government requires it. But one of the benefits of the paperwork is the ability to use those tools to teach people about the rule. And then, it's important to note that we expect that by next week, we're going to have a great sense, and that the vast majority of people have policies and procedures in place that comply with the federal expectations. And going forward, it will be about making sure that what is being done in practice aligns with those policies and practices that are now going to be in place. Next slide, please. Part of this change over the last 9 years has also been about teaching regional center staff. As I said, people with disabilities have for a long time experienced professionals who know best, or that was the framework that we operated under. So this has provided the opportunity to work with regional center staff as well, and provide them with lots of training on person-centered thinking, which focuses on people's strengths. There are also individuals that are employed by regional centers who are HCBS specialists, and they really touch the community as well as regional center staff, as well as our service providers. We also, in a related topic, have been focused on employment and paying for good outcomes. These are things that we're starting to focus more on, and those are all tied to the HCBS final rule. And finally, it really does come back to basics. And a lot of what we hear from regional center staff is that they really enjoy spending time with people, spending time with their families, getting to know them in a way that's richer and that then informs the services they receive. Next slide, please. And then the final group that's really important, and really where this opportunity we have together this evening comes in, is that we know that a big part of what regional centers have to be involved in, as are all of you, is helping those served by regional centers and their families to change their own expectations, to have the expectation that their services will help them to be part of the community. So first and foremost, we need to understand that change is hard. I spent a big chunk of my career helping people to move out of institutional settings. And one of the things that I had to train my staff on was, we're not judging decisions that were made before. Everybody made those decisions and made the best decision that they could make at that time, but that change is necessary. And so we don't want to demonize or make people feel bad about their old decisions, but to help them understand that something different is possible and is now expected. As I mentioned, we get to spend time really getting to know people and help them think through what is possible. And I think at the end of the day, the message is that people should expect acceptance in their communities and the support to navigate those communities. And that's really the foundational piece. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be here this evening.
Thank you, Amy. And I think you're going to be joined by Chris from Westside Regional Center to give an example of how one regional center is working. So go ahead, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me. It's my privilege to join you all this evening. It's exciting to be part of the civil rights movement, right? So I was invited to share. I am an HCBS specialist at Westside Regional Center. I'm not new to regional center system. I've been working for over 20 years, and I'm also a family member. So I've got all sides there. But I was asked to talk about our regional center's transition and working with providers to become compliant, as we say, at least compliant on paper and policies and procedures. And then in the future, I look forward to actually seeing these rules and requirements implemented. But to say that transition is easy is not true at all. It's hard, for all of us. And there have been challenges along the way. It's been challenging to come in and start making demands on people that I haven't met yet. But it's been my pleasure to meet some of you on this call. And now to see your face is just fantastic. But the approach that was successful for us at Westside involved relationships, support, and teamwork, and it couldn't have happened. I mean, we're not quite finished, but we'll be finished by next week. We've got a couple stragglers. But the approach that was helpful just to help us along this path of reaching compliance was, we're all in this together. All the regional centers are working on the exact same thing. We're working towards the same goal. So, we're not just picking on people or singling people out to make these changes. And, to be honest, there was some resistance and some fear along the way. And so how did I approach that? How did many regional center HCBS specialists approach that? Fear and resistance was, let's just work together to get this done. We're here to support you and we can do it. And you can do it. So some of the things that we did that really were successful was we reached out in a structured way. I actually had tremendous help from the QA specialists at Westside who already had relationships with many of the service providers. So they really helped me reach out to the service providers and other agencies to say, let's get this done. And because they had forged a positive relationship, then the response was in turn positive and supportive. They were able to follow up with their providers, and as a result, we did get policies and procedures that we needed. For those providers that I worked with myself, I was really encouraged because there were providers that have supported individuals in homes in the community since the 1960s, like before I was born, right? And, you know, they may not have had every piece of paper, policies, and procedures in place, but they were doing it. They knew the individuals. The individuals knew and trusted them. They knew what they liked, what they didn't like. They were helping them grow and develop. So for them, the challenge was, well, we've got to get it on paper now to show what you're already doing. And so it was really, really encouraging for me. That's kind of what kept me going, is working with the providers who were already doing this. And I have to say the majority were already doing this, and that was encouraging. You know, some of the things, like I said, there was fear, some resistance, but not a lot. And, you know, there was a lot of pressure, and we have a deadline. So we had to mention the deadline, and we had to use the word compliance as well. So there was a pressure to meet this demand, right? But a lot of it was continued teaching and providing information about what the federal requirements actually were. And so some people, they knew it was coming, like it was said at the very beginning. We knew it was coming. I think Judy said, how long have we been, you know, working on this and knowing about this? But actually knowing what the requirements were and what does that look like in terms of the rights of an individual and those that we support. So I found that most providers really wanted to provide what was necessary, and it didn't take much nudging because many of them were already there. And like I said, what really helped was the relationships that were built. And I'm so pleased to be part of a regional center where there were the positive relationships already established. What does the future hold? Well, as many of the providers mentioned, there will be more funds available for grants for not so much HCBS compliance at this point, but how do we implement? How do we make these changes? How do we support service providers now moving forward about the implementation and the struggles? So what that means is, yes, there's more funds available. So that's great. I'm excited about that. There'll be more training. Most regional centers are continuing to provide training in person-centered thinking, not only for the service coordinators, for QA specialists, for many people on staff. And we're looking forward to moving from this point of, like we mentioned, compliance on paper to let's see how it's actually being implemented in homes, in programs. And that's the exciting piece. So thank you for allowing me just to speak briefly. Like I said, Westside's almost there, just a few more. And we're just looking forward to moving past this into the point of implementation. Thanks so much.
You're on mute, Judy.
Sorry. Now we're going to hear from the families. Sorry about that. I did say thank you to Chris while you couldn't hear me. Thank you, Chris. We're going to hear from the families who we started. So remember, this is who we are. We started with the self-advocates. Now we're really closing down with the families. So Fernando, why don't you tell us your perspective?
Absolutely. Thank you, Judy. It's great to be here. Thanks everyone for the opportunity to share my perspective as a family member. And, you know, we've heard different perspectives, and it's really important to be able to have everybody who's part of this process to weigh in. So we appreciate the ability to do so as that of a family member. So why is HCBS really important to us? And as a dad of a young man served by the system for the last 16 years, my perspective, or that of a family perspective, is that we are as close to the source, which means the individual served by the system, as you can get. So I believe it's important to share what the dreams are, what this new rule will be able to bring compared to what is in reality today. So one of the points here is that the dream is that IPPs, or person-centered service planning, takes cultural differences into account. But what we know is that the reality is that before we can even begin to truly implement person-centered planning and support, the system has to get beyond a system of compliance to that of a true person-centered system of support. I think Mark Melanson shared earlier that compliance is not a bad word, and it's not, but neither is collaboration and the need as a united community to have a system of support that is led by person-centered support. And yes, compliance of the rule so that we can get to the point of it being person-centered. The other point is that the dream is that IPPs are supposed to take place at a time and place that works for our family member. But in reality, that's not happening. Most are scheduled when it's more convenient to the staff and others. And considering how convenient it is for the individual is really kind of almost an afterthought. So I'm glad to see that that's a point that's going to be captured. The dream is that family members' preferences are made clear, no matter how they communicate. And that really hits close to home for us, because the reality is that communication is a two-way street, and at minimum, it takes two people to have a conversation. But in many cases, we see that nonverbal individuals are usually not truly heard because people do not know how to communicate with them. They really don't understand or have the ability, if you will, to really listen to what this individual is trying to say. I always said that, our son who's nonverbal, we speak 3 languages at home. We speak English, we speak Spanish, and we speak Down syndrome. And it's really a true language in our home, because that gives us the ability to hear, to validate, and really embrace what our son is trying to communicate to us. So in order for individuals to communicate their preferences, we need to support them and ourselves with the ability to understand them. Then, once we do, it's to engage in meaningful dialogue, to be able to give them the opportunity to express themselves.
Thank you, Fernando.
Sure.
Now I'm going to turn to Kavita. Kavita,
Hi.
you go ahead and tell us your perspective.
Hi, Judy, and thank you so much for this town hall. Thank you, DVU, for putting it together, and everybody else who has shared. I'm a parent of a neurodiverse young lady, and why is HCBS and so important to us and how it actually impacts us is one thing I can tell you is that we're all part of a community, and right from preschool, my child has been in special education, and that form of segregation that happens at such a young age continues on beyond school, beyond college, if she gets to go to college. And then, of course, as she grows into adulthood and ages out. And the biggest fear of any one of all of us special needs parents is that we cannot die. And the reason that we feel that way is because there is not enough of a circle of support naturally in the community to be able to support them. And I think that's where, like Tim pointed out, he always has such wonderful things that he says, that why is there a need for a rule to make this happen? So I think one of the biggest pluses of HCBS is the fact that it expands on the natural supports. It builds a circle of allies and people in the community, like my daughter. I mean, I'm also a co-founder of PRAGNYA, where we actually train neurotypical, and it really doesn't take a lot. Neurotypical people and neuromajority people who can come together to be circles of support for our individuals. And of course, this automatically will create a sense of belonging for these individuals, whether it is at in the workplace, whether it's in schools and colleges. There's this sense of interdependence. We are all dependent on the other person for something or the other. So it kind of builds, it validates their existence, improves their quality of life. And, that's all one is looking for at the end of the day. Are they happy? I mean, what quality of a life is it if they are restricted to a bed, if they're not able to get out and do what they want, or for that matter, if they're restricted to just a home or just going out into the community and walking around without people interacting with them. So I think that is really crucial. And that's where I think HCBS is really going to make an impact in the lives of people, where it impacts their quality of life.
Thank you. Let's go back to Fernando now.
Absolutely. Thank you. So now we're talking about choices from the family perspective. And the question comes back to the dream versus reality, right? So the question when I first saw this slide was, well, whose choice? Many times our community members are asked about their choice, but in reality, it's more of a process than an honest question. The system today is not equipped to adequately process true choice responses from our community for a myriad of reasons, right? So when we look at the dream being that choice is critical, especially to get culturally appropriate service providers. But the reality is that choice has to be person-centered from the individual, and it's not to just check a pre-existing box, right? Many in our households are like give you an example, are multi-generational. And choice should not only include the culture, but also the diversity within that generation. And our individual diversity within our culture many times defines who we are as a person. So it's really a lot more complex, but when it comes to choice is the ability to create a point A to point B, not just a whole different pathway that takes a long time to get to that ability to hear the individual's choices. And I think just to kind of wrap up the last two slides that I shared on is really reflective of how this group that's here today and how diverse we are in different elements that we bring to the table as far as what our stakeholder position is, right? But it's imperative, especially for those of us who are here as part of the community, to really unite our voices and unite our efforts and really try to bridge this gap that we've seen that has been a reality to what is really truly a dream that we need to get to. So thank you for the ability to share.
Fernando. And Kavita.
One of the most beautiful parts is about being able to, when every one of us can choose to have visitors and people whenever we want to, this particular, why not individuals who have IDDD, who are neurodiverse, and ensuring that they have people who can visit them at any time of day. A classic example, I work with a lot of self-advocates. I have a self-advocate friend who just got into this self-determination program. Prior to being in this program, his agency was his staff, basically live-in caregivers, used to determine when people visited him and when the phone would be answered for people to be able to connect with him. And I think it's taking away from the dignity of his life when he's relegated in his own home. He's on the lease, but in his own home, he's stuck in a bedroom all day and is completely and entirely reliant on paid staff. And I think the other aspect is also the fact that being self-determined can actually prevent abuse to a great extent, because they get to choose who they want to work with, who are the people that they want in their lives to be able to support them the way they want to be supported. And also, they get to choose whether they want to be in the master bedroom, they want to be in their own particular room, especially with regard to this particular self-advocate friend of mine that I'm talking about. He's been in self-determination for 2 weeks now, and I wish I could share his picture here, but he's got this big grin on his face that you really cannot wipe off, which I've never seen. It took 1.5 years for him to get into self-determination, but it's so well worth it, because I think just having that small quality of life, to be able to go out and eat a steak when he wants to eat a steak without seeming like a burden on somebody who's having to cut it up and feed it to him, and then sit at his own dining table in his house with his staff, engaging with them in a conversation about political advocacy, is all that was required to get that big grin on his face. So, I just wanted to share that the dignity, the freedom, and the quality of life is what is really important for us to keep in mind, especially, and that's what HCBS impacts.
Thank you so much, Kavita and Fernando. And I want to point out that for those who may not know this, if you're in the self-determination program, you've had to abide by these HCBS rules from the beginning, from the time you entered. It could have been as early as 2018. You had to abide by these rules. So we're seeing that it's being done successfully by 2,300 people around the state, no complaints from anybody. So we know it can be done with everyone else. So I'm going to go back to DRC right now to just tell us a little bit about what happens next.
Thanks, Judy. This is Sabrina with DRC again. So as you all have heard throughout this presentation, there are a lot of really good things in this HCBS rule. And so we want to make sure that going forward that this is implemented as fully as possible, not just on paper, right? So that people truly have access to their rights to the autonomy that is guaranteed by our civil rights under the ADA and Olmstead. So we at DRC have a few questions about how this is going to move forward. And these are things that we are going to continue to monitor. And we just want to put out there to let you all know that we're wondering these things too, and we're going to keep an eye on it. So first is, how will sites be monitored and how will we know if the rules are being followed? Second is, can a disabled person or a family member report a setting that they think is not following the rules? Because you all just learned about how important these are, but what happens if it's not being followed? And the last thing is, how can we make sure that the rules the state wants to extend until 2024 end up implemented? As I think someone put in the chat when I was talking about the parts of the rule that the state got an extension on because of the pandemic, some of those are really foundational to what the HCBS settings rule means. And so we want to make sure that even though we understand that the pandemic has caused quite a strain on the system, those things do need to end up happening. So those are some things that we are still trying to figure out, and that we hope that this rule will be fully implemented with all of your help on this call.
Thank you. So ultimately, I now want to introduce Vicki Smith, who is the Deputy Director of Policy and Program Development at California's Department of Developmental Services. We didn't want this to be a DDS event, because we wanted this to be peer-to-peer. We're self-advocates speaking to self-advocates, providers speaking to providers, families speaking to families, regional centers speaking to regional centers, and to show that we're all unified in making this work. But ultimately, who is responsible for making this work is the state of California and the Department of Developmental Services. And Vicki, by the way, people should know Vicki has been a longtime advocate for our community, and I think she's amazing. So thank you. And Vicki, we're counting on you to make this work. So tell us what's in your future.
Well, no pressure there, Judy. Thanks for thanks for inviting me, and it's really an honor to be here. You should also tell them the truth. I actually registered to attend. And was plucked out of the registration and asked if I would say a couple of words. And it truly was my honor to be invited to tell you that. I so appreciate the fact that this is being self-advocate and family advocate led, and with providers and regional centers being able to share their perspective on kind of getting us what we call to the compliance date of March 17th. But at the department, we kind of have a philosophy that it's not just to, but it's through. And we compliance is the minimum standard, right? So this fancy thing that we call HCBS final rule, which sounds so fancy, is really to us about basic dignity and respect issues. And so the idea that we're talking about civil rights is right on target with where the department's stance and framework is on helping the system make sure that we're continuing down that path. And why? It's not just because the federal funding is tied to this concept of home and community-based services, but it's also because you said that it was important to you to make sure that you were treated with the same dignity and respect as anyone would be treated, regardless of where their funding comes from for their supports and their services. And I think that that's something really important to remember. So as we align folks, and I have to say, regional centers and providers have been working so hard and so diligently to make sure that everything on paper is what they want to implement and provide to you as self and family advocates, that we as a department have the responsibility ultimately to make sure that we continue to monitor, to make sure to have oversight, to make sure that the practice that has been promised is happening. And how we do that is also by you all voicing if that's not happening, right? And sharing back with your regional center, with the department, if you're finding that your rights are not being upheld, just the same as you would now, right? So again, I just wanted to say those few words. I know that this isn't. I don't want to like departmentalize the concept, because it truly is to us a dignity and respect issue. We're so proud to see self-advocates here, making sure that they're also reaching out to your peers and letting them know about their rights, so that we can push forward in the civil rights aspect of this. And the department will be working also with some self-advocate groups to continue the message down the line. This is a partnership. I'm glad that several of the panelists kind of brought that up. Our take at the department also is like, what support do you need from us in making sure that the message gets conveyed out further to folks that are participating in services and supports and those that are providing your services and supports? How can we be a better partner in that? How can we help support the information getting to folks and making sure that we collectively, as a community here in California, are making sure that folks with intellectual and developmental disabilities are afforded the exact same opportunities in their lives as anyone else would be afforded, so that we're not seeing any difference between those two. So again, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me to say a couple of words and kind of share where the viewpoint is of the department and how we look at the final rule.
Thank you so much, Vicki. And I think there might be a couple of questions as we go through this, so hang tight. I just want to offer a couple of resources before we get to questions. This is the website that DDS has on how they're working on this issue. Then for those of you who want to work with us to advocate for good implementation, there is a national coalition called HCBS Advocacy Coalition. They have tremendous resources on there from all 50 states. And then finally, the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network has pretty much done some of the best work on this, I think. And I really encourage you to go to autisticadvocacy.org and look up their toolkit on the HCBS rule. All right, well, thanks to everybody. It's now time for questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I've seen a number of questions come up in the chat. But we're going to start with Barb. So Ed, while you're assembling the questions, we're going to start with Barb. And I'm asking you to unmute. You can ask your question.
Well, I totally appreciate everything that was said today. Obviously, these rules and regulations are needed. My situation's a little bit different. I know there's the majority of population needs this support and needs these rights, and I'm totally for it, including my son who's nonverbal autistic. But at the same time, some of the rules and regulations also hurt us in a way, for lack of a better word, because like an example, he went to a facility, a home here in my area for out-of-home respite because we went out of town for a few days. And she had just opened up the home and just got approved after 4 years of jumping through all the hoops. She had my son, and she told me she didn't know that he was might run out the front door, that he was gonna constantly be getting into food and all these behaviors. And then she called me, we had to come back from our vacation because she told me she couldn't keep him anymore because she's not allowed to tell him he can't go outside. She's not allowed to tell him that he has to stop eating. And my son he eats everything. If something is available, his OCD will keep him eating and eating and eating and eating. So how do we, give him his rights, which everybody deserves, and I can totally appreciate it. Like when he goes to his day program, of course I want him to eat lunch when he wants to eat lunch, not when, their schedule says he has to eat lunch. But at the same time, now to find like an out-of-home respite is already difficult enough, let alone now with these rules and regulations, the regional centers really coming down on these homes and telling them, well, you can't lock up food. You can't keep them from going outside. You can't this. And so then that also hinders us. So I don't know if there's a happy medium here, But I did understand that there's certain allowances, but they said it was going to be like temporary. She felt that there was no allowances, that she could not take my son any longer because of the level of care. And now she has 2 other clients, and like one is diabetic, so he can't get to food, but she manages him. I don't know how she does it, but they don't run out the door, and, you know, and different things like that. So anyways, I'm just trying to understand what.
Thank you. I appreciate those questions. And I'm wondering if any of our experts, I'm looking at Will, I'm looking at Amy, Vicky, if anyone, or actually STEP agency or CCLN who works with individuals with high needs all the time. If anybody wants to take this. Just, everyone wants to stay away from this question?
Well, I'll take a gander, Judy, if no one else is willing to. I won't speak directly to your situation because I don't know your situation, but I will say just in general. I presume that it was a licensed setting. And so we've been working very closely with community care licensing also to walk through what the elements are of the home and community-based final rule and what the requirements are, because they have the compliance oversight for the licensing side. And you know, it all falls back to, and I think that the panel did a really great job at talking about this really intensive person-centered planning approach, right? And your person-centered planning outlines what somebody's needs are, what services are, and really tailoring that around the individual. The home and community-based services final rule, in my opinion, has somewhat been misunderstood in saying that it's an all or nothing situation. But the core of it really goes back to that person-centered planning approach. And within it, it allows what we call modifications to some of the larger elements of what someone might look and say, well, gosh, this is an all or nothing, right? I have to provide all of this or nothing. And what it does is it allows for modifications based on somebody's health or safety needs to justify where there might be somewhat of a scene. And I'm going to use air quotes with my hands in case you can't see me, is kind of this modification to the allowances of that independence, if you would use those terms so gently. So I'm not speaking specifically to your situation, but it really does fall back to that person-centered plan and making sure that it's tailored. And when we're picking out the right services and support for our loved ones, that we're picking someone that understands what that plan is and can actually meet the need that you're asking for. So during that time that we're picking maybe that respite setting is making sure that they understand what that means and what it doesn't mean, how it doesn't violate the HCBS final rule, or maybe does it violate the HCBS final rule, and having that open conversation and dialogue.
Thank you so much, Vicki. Appreciate it. Eric Thurmond, we'll go with you next, and then Ed, I'll come over to you after Eric's question. Eric, can you unmute? There we go.
Yeah, yes. Is there a plan for regional centers that are not in compliance with the final ruling?
A plan for the regional centers or for the specific providers?
Oh, we're talking more providers versus regional centers, because our regional centers in control of most of the consumers and their affairs.
Well, I would say, and people chime in, that this rule is about the setting that an individual client experiences their services, and about the person-centered planning process. So I would say actually that regional centers could be out of compliance around the person-centered planning requirements. That's for sure, because IPPs are supposed to be done in a very person-centered way. As Tim said, you want to have it at Denny's on a Sunday morning, you want to have your IPP, you should be able to do that. But the actual settings, I would say, you know, it's the compliance is coming from the service provider. But obviously it's the responsibility of the regional centers to confirm that those settings are compliant. Does anybody want to add anything to that statement? What I just said? No. You know, one of the things I just want to add is I hate the term compliance because it sounds so, you know, rule driven, and that's not what this rule is about. This is not even a rule. This is a civil rights advancement. And so to say that this is all about keeping to the rules makes it so negative. And instead, what we should be thinking about is look at these amazing opportunities that people with disabilities are now going to have. They're going to have this great opportunity to have a meaningful, inclusive experience in their communities, that they're having the opportunities to have competitive integrated employment, that they have opportunities to have peers and friends who are not people with disabilities, as well as people with disabilities. You can have both. So there's all these great opportunities to live your life as people without disabilities live their life, right? So, okay, Ed, why don't you start with a question from the chat?
Sure thing, Judy. We have a lot of really great questions today, as always. One of the first ones is from Zoe Giesberg. Can I ask if it complies with the HCBS rule if a disabled person receiving services wants to choose a fellow disabled person to be a roommate when living in the community?
So I don't know, Mark or Jackie, if you want to take that.
So the question is they are not able to choose their roommate, or they are able to choose their roommate?
Would you like it reread, Mark?
That would be great. Thank you, Ed.
Sure, of course. Can I ask if it complies with the HCBS rule if a disabled person receiving services wants to choose a fellow disabled person to be a roommate when living in the community?
That would be compliant with HCBS rules. If they weren't able to choose their roommate, that would be non-compliant with HCBS rule setting.
It is okay to have a roommate who has a similar disability to you, as long as both of you are living your lives the way you choose to live your lives. You can do stuff together, but you can also do stuff separately, and that's completely fine. Our next question, Ed.
Sure, and our next question that we have is from Lily. How do programs that have traditionally provided services only to people with disabilities have to change? For example, camps for people with disabilities or art programs for people with disabilities. Are they required now to admit to their programs campers or artists who are not disabled?
Maybe that would be called reverse integration. I don't know if Harry or Mark or any of the providers want to take this, or maybe even some of the regional centers. Chris, maybe you've seen. How are these, programs that have literally just been for people, regional center clients for decades in some cases, in a center, in a specific setting? What are they supposed to do now?
That would be a creative solution for those providers, is to open it up to people who did not have disabilities.
Yeah, I think the other way to sort of think about it, in my view, is that rather than like people come to the center and we bring in a art instructor, is instead individuals would go to an art class in the community. So that the subject matter is sort of similar, but they're living lives more similarly to people who don't have disabilities. The other part that is, I think, tricky in this is that a lot of day services are ratioed, meaning you have one staff for 3 or 4 or 5 people, so that following individual choice gets confusing, right? If I have 3 people and one wants an art class and one wants to go to the basketball court and one wants to go to the library, how do you respect individual choice and meet them? The answer is that instead of 1 staff, you have 3 staff, right? And everybody has a support person to go with them. On the financial side, and Vicky and regional centers see this, is that essentially is tripling the cost. So there's a cost element that gets tricky when moving into more individualized, customized supports. So the answers may seem sort of apparent of the way to do it, but the cost structures make it tricky on how to make this a truly individualized, person-centered system.
Thanks, Harry. Nina, do you have a question or comment? Oh, there you go. Okay. Oh, I just muted you. Try it again. Can you do it? There we go.
Got it. Yeah, no, I had put my hand up when Barb's question came up, and I really loved Vicky's response, and something you said later, Judy, about I just felt the need. I feel that, you know, my son and you know, many other families with, you know, loved ones like him who can have very high support needs. I don't want to be in a situation where he is somehow, you know, denied the ability to enjoy the benefits of the HCBS rule wherever he, you know, wherever he is, but there needs to be support. And I just feel that often the scenarios that Barb raised are raised by the big pushback from often a lot of parents saying, this is so terrible. These places are going to have to, you know, do, you know, change in this way. And my, you know, my kid has these needs. And again, I think the key is person-centered planning, and really also supported decision-making to the maximum extent possible. I think that, you know, there's a consultant, Laura Bracken, often says there's too much focus on the physical setting rather than what these are all about, and the ability to get support in learning how to make choices, expressing your choices. And so your person-centered plan and your support plan should be tailored so that the actual meaning of what the HCBS rule is offering up can be experienced by everybody. And so I just felt like it has to be said, like, not these sort of all or nothing at all situations, and it's all about the building. It's like, no, it's about how are people being supported and being allowed to make the choices that, you know, in all aspects of their lives to the maximum extent possible. So I had to get on my soapbox. So thank you.
Thank you, Nina. That's great. Pam, did you have a question?
Hi, yeah, I put one question in the chat about day programs and having like non-disabled people. What would that look like? But you already answered that by maybe them going out somewhere else to take an art class or something like that. My second question would be, my child is medically fragile and will be aging out of the school system in a few short years here, and going to a day program where she would need like nursing services throughout the day. How would that work?
So first, I'm just going to say that you should not assume that your daughter has to go to a day program. Okay. That my son does not go to a day program. You can be an adult and not go to a day program. You can have a life. My son doesn't have a program, he has a life. So I want people to always like shift their thinking a bit, that they have choices that they want to make and they find people to support them in those choices. It might be a day program provider who helps support them in those choices, but they're not going to a program every day, right? That actually, when people call their adults, you know, who are 30 years old going to school still because it's their day program, that stuff makes my head explode, because it's like they're not in school anymore. They're grown ups and now they're living their lives. So, but I really wish that Lisa Zalagi was able to stay. She had to run. Lisa runs an amazing community-based program where she herself is a mother of a daughter who has significant medical needs and is fully in the community every single day. So so we are, it can be done. It can be done. And I'm just going to give a warning to the interpreters that we're going to go 10 minutes long so that we can get all the questions. Okay. Thanks, everybody. All right, Ed, give us another question from the chat and then I'll go to you, Ruby.
Hi, yes. 1 second. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, great.
Can't see you though, but we can hear you.
1 second. Let me slide my
There we go.
cover over. What are the requirements to be an HCBS specialist? What is the role within the community?
Well, Chris, why don't you answer that?
That's funny. What are the requirements? My journey was perhaps a little different than some other HCBS specialists, but generally there needs to be some experience providing services or supporting those individuals who are served by regional center. And of course, organizational skills and all those different wonderful things that a person needs to have. But I think there was a question about, are all the requirements the same across all regional centers for HCBS specialists as well? And I think generally there are, because it was a position that was created to assist regional centers to come on board with all the HCBS requirements. So I don't know specifically in terms of degrees or, you know, all of that. It may vary, but I don't know. I don't know how to answer it in specific detail.
Well, thank you for answering that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in, Judy.
Say again? Oh, go ahead, Amy.
Yeah.
Thanks, Amy.
No worries. So there weren't specific educational requirements or anything like that. But what it really, I would say that, you know, in most regional centers, it was a promotional opportunity for staff who already worked at the regional center. And what regional centers really were looking for, I think, with the opportunity to create this position, they were all looking for kind of the same thing: strong communication skills, organizational skills, all of those things. But I think first and foremost, the passion for seeing the final rule brought to life. So, you know, there certainly is the component that Chris talked about in terms of how to work well with people to do the paperwork side. But in my experience, most of what the work has been really working with service providers and staff and others in the community about the philosophy and trying to make it seem less scary and more exciting. That's what I've seen them doing over the last number of years.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it. So I'm going to unmute Ruby. Ruby is likely, because she's a good friend of mine, to speak in Spanish. So I want to make sure that all of the folks who are English speakers have chosen your language as English speaking, or else you will not be able to hear the interpretation. So go ahead, Ruby.
Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Ruby Saldaña, yo tengo 3 hijos con disabilidades y yo estoy aquí escuchando todo esto y honestamente yo me siento como que estoy en otro mundo, porque yo no sé en qué mundo existe todo eso, Yuri. Yo he estado escuchando la regla HCBS y estaba súper confundida si esto era una regla que estaba poniendo más barreras a nosotros o era algo que nos beneficiaba. Porque como yo lo estoy experimentando en la comunidad hispana, es más una barrera para los hispanos. Y tú lo vas a escuchar si en media hora te metes a nuestro cafecito donde más de 100 personas hispanas están ahí. Tú nunca vas a escuchar que te dicen, oh, sí es individualizado. No es un sí o un no, es a lo que el cliente quiera o necesite. Eso no pasa en nuestro mundo. Solamente eso quería decir, ¿quién se va a asegurar de que los centros regionales de verdad la estén aplicando como es la regla final? Que ni siquiera, como alguien dijo, es una regla, son los derechos civiles de nuestros hijos, a que ellos puedan hacer lo que quieren hacer, cuando lo quieren hacer, cómo lo quieren hacer. ¿Quién se va a asegurar que los centros regionales de verdad la estén siguiendo como fue creada?
Thank you so much, Ruby. And I saw something that you put in the chat that I wanted to reach out to folks to answer, and you kind of alluded to it. There are some regional centers who have been telling people in the self-determination program, which is our test case of how this is going to happen, that when they receive one-to-one support, let's say to learn how to swim, or one-to-one therapy, that is not compliant because you're not with a group of typical people. And my understanding is that when you're one-to-one, you're not in a group of people with disabilities. You are one-to-one. And I'm wondering if Vicky or Amy has any advice on this, because we're hearing this pretty consistently, particularly in the Latino community, that they're facing this. Vicky, do you have any sense of that?
I'm sorry, Judy, I kind of missed the question there.
That's okay. What people are hearing concerns in the self-determination program, which obviously could foreshadow what would happen starting next week, is that people who are taking one-on-one like swim lessons or one-on-one behavioral therapy or one-on-one an art class, that they are non-compliant because they're not out in the community at a YMCA group class, which of course my son would never ever be able to do something like that. So I'm wondering, could you say that a one-on-one is compliant?
A one-on-one can certainly be compliant. And again, I think it goes back to that person-centered plan and looking at what the tailored structure of services is doing for someone's life. So there's not like a general rule saying that, well, if it's a one-on-one, it's non-compliant, right? Every case should be looked at differently and tailored to the individual. Yeah, I don't think there's a black and white on those situations. Now, if you tell me a scenario where, you know, a one-on-one gets me, we have no interaction with anybody, it's not what I want to do, it's not how I define my community, and I'm sitting in a dark room all day, as somebody kind of alluded to in the chat, then we're probably going to say that's not a service that we should be paying for, right? It's not helping somebody become the integrated individual that they want to be. And we wouldn't want to see probably a person-centered plan that was I don't think that was something that you or your loved ones would ever put in a person-centered plan, you know, for a meaningful life. So, I mean, if we want to take the extreme example, I guess, but yeah, there's not just a definitive one-on-one. It means that it's not compliant.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that, Vicky. I think we're only going to have time for one more question, and that's going to be Nushin Nazarian.
Hi. Okay, this me. Okay, I just kind of got late to the meeting, I missed it, and I just was reading some of the comments and listening for the last 15 minutes only, and I didn't understand the all or nothing. It means for all the community base or center base. Is that all about, or is it about something else?
I'm not sure I understood your question. Ask again.
What is the all or nothing?
All or nothing. I'm not sure where the all or nothing came from.
I don't know. We were just talking about all or nothing options. Like, I think it was about community base versus home base or combination. So I didn't hear all of it. I don't know exactly.
I mean, for us, we've been talking a lot about you need to have full access to the community. You need to have opportunities for choice and control of your life. And yes, you need to be supported to do that in a very person-centered way. And so I don't know that I've heard anyone say all or nothing before, but it's here somebody saying means treating people with disabilities like in the past, sequestered or only with full community and no choice to be in smaller intentional settings.
Exactly, that's what I mean, because for my son it's the same.
Right, so you can have a choice to be in smaller intentional settings, and I'm glad I have one more minute to make this point. You absolutely can. My son, not anymore, but he used to take a Jewish class with all people with disabilities that was completely segregated. It's just that class was not paid for by the regional center. That class was not paid for through a self-determination program. We private paid for that class. So you can make those choices, have those experiences, but the federal government and the state government are no longer going to pay for services where people are isolated and they don't have full access to the community. So that's the bottom line. People still have the choice to do it. It's just not going to get paid out of your services. So you need to shift the way those funds work using your own private funds for certain things. So I'm going to end now only because we have asked our our interpreters to stay on 10 more minutes, and we so completely appreciate that they did. I want to thank our amazing coalition of people. I don't know if we were a coalition, but we're certainly a like-minded group of folks who believe that this is a new day. It's a new day for people with disabilities on St. Patrick's Day. So on the 17th, whatever the day of the week that is, I think it's a Thursday, go have a beer if you're legal, go have a beer on us and celebrate the fact that we are entering a new era for people with disabilities. And I thank all of you. We will have this recording available as well as the sideshow available for everybody in the future. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this. Thanks to our speakers, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.